Vamos a empezar con la siguiente charla, que va a ser de la mano de Urs Kosovic, que viene de EUBAC, y nos va a hablar sobre desde las políticas a la práctica implementando la EPBD. Espero que os resulte interesante. Y nada, a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Your turn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. As was said, I represent EUBAC, who are the European Building Automation Controls Association. We represent manufacturers, some of them represented here as well, like Airzone. Happy to see you. So we work in Brussels to try to move the European legislation in a direction that any kind of building decarbonization and energy efficiency improvements move away from just focusing on the building envelope, but actually look at the hidden potential of improving the technical building systems. In general, EPBD was already, or Energy Performance of Buildings Directive was already introduced earlier today, so I'm gonna try not to repeat myself too much, and there's also a panel after me discussing sort of the local practical ITRE implications of this, but just to tell you some of the deadlines that I think I should mention in this regard. First of all, buildings represent 40% of energy use in Europe in general. And the improvements that can be made through improving the efficiency of technical building systems is around 46% saved in energy use. And we have been advocating in Brussels to introduce mandatory requirements for quite some years now in order to have some practical mandatory tools for the manufacturers of building automation controls at the national level in order to not just try to sell their products, but also have some pull from the legislative side in terms of what should be practically implemented at the buildings. So already from the end of last year, all non-residential buildings above 290 kilowatts have to be equipped with certain building automation controls capabilities. From the end of the decade, this scope will extend also to smaller non-residential buildings above 70 kilowatts. What these kilowatts mean are, of course, the effective rated output of all your power generators, your heat generators, cool generators, and ventilation equipment combined. And so we have these two deadlines, and I will tell you a little bit more in the end of the presentation also what does this practically mean in terms of these requirements. In between that, all of these requirements will need to be transposed in the national context. So from the European level, you have a directive, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, but of course every member state, like Spain, has their national legislation. So until next year, May, all of these requirements that you see here have to be written into the national legislation, and the legislator is also obliged to set out a way how they're going to ensure compliance. What this means is not that they just copy-paste the text in your national legislation, but they also designate who is going to be the responsible authority to ensure compliance with these requirements and what steps they're going to take to make sure that they know which buildings are in the scope and what state they're in. So next year, 2026, together with the implementation deadline in Spain, we will have new requirements also for indoor environmental quality monitoring that come together with the BACS requirements, as well as some automatic functionality requirements in residential buildings. I noticed that in the morning session, it was in Spanish, so I didn't exactly know if I misunderstood it, but there was a suggestion that there are no mandatory requirements in residential sector, and that somehow some of the requirements are only suggestive. This is not the case, so there are certain automation requirements coming from next year that will be mandatory also for the residential sector. And finally, perhaps a buzzword that you've heard, the Smart Readiness Indicator, or SRI. which will become mandatory after 2027. So you might be familiar with the energy performance certificates, which rate the energy performance of buildings currently. The smart readiness indicator is something similar, but instead of rating the energy performance of the building or what it consumes, it looks at what capabilities the building has in terms of smartness, in terms of ability to integrate with the grid, in terms of monitoring indoor environmental quality, and other aspects. So we make sure that buildings are future-proof. So this is sort of not a mandatory requirement in terms of some sort of particular capabilities, but it is a mandatory certificate that will rate the building's capabilities, and we hope through this also drive a little bit market uptake of these smart technologies. In context of the broader Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, there's of course other areas that this directive covers, and those were just some of the smart building requirements that I mentioned. But as a directive as a whole, it aims to drive the renovation wave across Europe. As I mentioned to you earlier, buildings represent 40% of energy consumption, so the Commission has set out certain requirements for the worst performing buildings. They are not specific in terms of how member states should implement them, but they are set certain targets. So by 2030, 16% of all worst performing non-residential buildings should be renovated, and there should be a 16% reduction in energy consumption in the residential sector. By 2033, 26% of worst performing buildings should be renovated, and by 2035, 20 to 22% reduction of total energy consumption in residential sectors should occur. Why this is important also for technical building systems and HVAC and controls is because a new study that we launched last year together with Politico di Milano demonstrated that significant energy performance class improvements can be gained through climate controls alone. So we demonstrated that if you equip your building with a certain class of building automation control, you can expect up to 2 energy performance certificate class jump from the worst performing buildings. So as you saw before in the slide, these worst performing buildings need to be brought up a few steps. And we have demonstrated that with regulation and control alone, you can achieve this. And not only that, what this study also showed is that you can expect payback times of 2 to 3 years. So it means that you can invest in automation control systems. The payback is 2 to 3 years. You meet the European requirements in terms of improving your building stock. And on top of that, you have a continuous asset that can continue saving you money, and you can invest in further, more deeper renovations down the line. You can, of course, download the study on our website as well, if you're interested. We try to use this when we go to the national legislators and try to tell them why perhaps they should not disregard some of these smaller requirements, which are not so headline-grabbing. And beyond that, we also try to support and explain what these new requirements mean at the national level. And together with AFEC, this has also been translated in Spanish. We provided a practical tool which goes through these building automation and control systems requirements as written in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And it looks at each one of the capabilities and explains to everybody in an understandable language what your building should be capable of doing and what documentation it should be able to produce and show in order to demonstrate that you are compliant with these new requirements. This is also available for everybody to use and available on our website. So when we talk about these BACS requirements in 2025 and 2029, through this you can actually understand what systems exactly you should equip in your buildings. And this is something that we try to promote also with the national legislators to use something like this in order to ensure compliance. As I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of member states put this in their national law, and then when we go to them and ask them, okay, do you know how are the buildings doing, what are you doing? They tell us they have no idea, they're not following this, and they just hope that the building owners are compliant by default. So we try to encourage them to provide practical tools also at the national level for the stakeholders, either in the form of training, either in the form of compliance checklists to ensure that the buildings actually, as required by the EPBD, also meet these requirements. We also try to promote that because there's so many kind of legislation coming from the EU now, we also try to promote to link a lot of these requirements together. So as I mentioned before, there's energy performance certificate requirements, there's inspection requirements for HVAC as well, as you might have heard. We try to tell member states that this is the opportunity where you can link a lot of these things because they overlap. So when you're inspecting the HVAC, or when you're inspecting buildings' energy performance, or when in the future you are looking at the smart readiness indicator of a building, all of the things that you're checking, you're essentially checking also the compliance with these requirements. So it's not that you need separate inspectors and separate sessions in order to comply with these requirements. You can do it all together, and we try to promote this integrated approach at the national level as well. We are here for today and tomorrow. You can find us also online and contact us to find out more about the European legislation. And if you have any other questions, either to EPBD, to some of the specific requirements that I have not mentioned today, or how to comply with these requirements, or what building automation control systems means, please feel free to get in touch, or if you have any questions now. Otherwise, thank you for having me.
¿Tenéis alguna pregunta, alguna cuestión que queráis hacer? A ver.
No, Gust, thank you very much. Thank you for letting us use the EUVAC material, because those are part of the regulation and control working group at effect that helped revising and implementing the checklists, for example. And the question is, well, we more or less know how Spain is going on the EPBD implementation. It's going a little slower than we expected. What is the level of progress of the national transpositions of EPBD in other countries where you are more familiar with?
All right. So there's, and that is always with European legislation true, there's those who go really quickly and are performing really well, and some who are in the middle, and some who are really slow. I would say that Spain is not on the slowest end, it's approximately in the middle. Most of the member states are missing the deadlines, so that's normal, we expect that. But that doesn't mean that progress is not happening. So we're very happy that even to see incremental change. We know that in France, they've been very ambitious. So some of the requirements you saw coming only now from the latest EPBD, they already had in their BACS décret, which they have at the national level already for some years. They had it before EPBD came out. In terms of the smart readiness indicator, they have similar schemes looking at building flexibility already implemented as well. So they're quite ambitious in that level as well. We know from this side of the world also Portugal is doing quite well. They have specific references to international standardization when they talk about these requirements. So as I mentioned, just transposing this directive in your national legislation doesn't tell you anything in terms of, okay, what do I have to have in the building? So we encourage member states either to have a checklist or to have a reference to international standards. And one such standard, EN 52120, deals with everything related to building automation control systems. And if you require a certain class of these BACS, you meet the EPBD requirements. And that's what Portugal has done. And they've set a really ambitious class of BACS requirements as well. So we're happy to see that as well. There's other examples that are doing really good and others that are doing very little. We know that Poland barely transposed the previous directive last year. We know that some countries like Ireland are struggling. They transposed the directive, but they're not doing anything to ensure compliance. So, as I said, the picture is varied, but nevertheless, progress is happening. Even if incremental, we're happy to see that something's happening.
And another question. With the first implementation, we had this long debate about how to transpose, and there were significantly differences between countries, technically and economically viable. Mm-hmm. What is the status now? How can we ensure that that is not escape way of compliance with the regulation and control requirements.
So that cannot be an escape way, as you correctly address. In the directive, it says that these requirements only apply where technically and economically feasible, without defining what technically and economically feasible means. But nevertheless, the Commission, in their guidelines, say that the member states are responsible for defining what technically and economically feasible means for the local context. So that cannot be an escape clause, because the member states need to define when they transpose the directive what this means. So it's up to the member states to do. We know that France is setting a really good example by defining it as a 10-year payback time. So you need, as a building owner or a consultant, to demonstrate when you are renovating a building or when you're implementing these requirements. Or if you own a building that needs to comply or is in the scope, you need to demonstrate a study showing that if you implement this, it's not going to pay back in 10 years' time. So that's a good approach, we think, because these systems, as I mentioned, usually pay back in 2 to 3 years. So fair enough, if you can demonstrate that 10 years you won't get your money back, you don't need to implement them, which is usually never. So you always need to comply. In other countries, they just skip this altogether. So Germany, when they implemented the previous requirements, they didn't even put out this escape clause. So everybody in scope needs to implement these requirements. So different member states can have different approaches, but as long as they define, we're happy with that. Right.
¿Tenemos alguna pregunta más o algo? ¿No? Nada, todo ha quedado claro. Bueno. Thank you so much for being here and for the speech. And muchas gracias al público.